Well, it's so Wednesday, and that means it's time for Weather Wagers again. Here we go, and this is a snowy Wednesday across the Northeast, and where we're sitting in our newsroom in central Pennsylvania, we're looking out the window and seeing something we haven't really seen much this winter.
No, although maybe it followed us from Buffalo, because there was
have.
a lot of snow during that game, which we did indeed call for.
We did. We nailed that forecast, and we're hoping to nail this one, too. This isn't going to be a lot of snow for Pennsylvania, but it will at least be a few inches, which, again, given the current pattern across the country, it's been an active pattern, but, boy, it has been wet. Let's see. Can we show it?
Yeah,
Can we see it?
Well, there's a little bit of a glare.
It's behind Mr. Shiner.
Yeah, it's there in the parking lot. I mean, these are big flakes. It's coming down at a fairly good clip. And Mr. Shiner, you brought up a point earlier. You asked how long this is going to last, and much like the winter, it's short.
Yeah, it's going to be washed away later on. That's been the problem with these snows. That does not happen in Buffalo, mind you. They keep their 5 feet of snow around.
They certainly do, and it just seems like it keeps coming, mainly because the lakes haven't frozen over. I mean, there's been many times by this point in the winter. Remember, it is January.
Correct.
That the Great Lakes freeze over. Lake effect snow season is over, but so is the Bills season.
So is the Bills season, and in a pretty. I don't want to say harrowing fashion, but I will say they got beat up.
They definitely did get beat up.
And I will tell you, the Bengals were very impressed. They impressed Tony Romo. I know he was very excited about how both their offensive and defensive lines were getting some push.
They were, and you have to wonder about Leslie Frazier. I like the guy, but could he be in some trouble?
Well, and there's a case, too, and I like it that we're just off and running here, but all these people that have said we think Leslie Frazier deserves a shot as a head coach. I mean, didn't he get a shot?
He did get a shot. Minnesota Vikings, and now he was with a Super Bowl contending team, and it didn't look like they were ready.
And they flopped.
They flopped.
So I'm just, again, I'm asking why. I mean, I need to see more. Sorry.
And if I'm Bills fans, I would not talk to Philadelphia Eagles fans because we've been through the trauma of a potential franchise quarterback falling apart.
Yeah, we have. Yes.
I'm a little worried about Josh Allen, but we'll get into all that in a little bit.
Well, you always take it too far. I wouldn't go that far.
I don't know. I don't know. Hey, listen, you find out who the real players are in the big situations, and he folded.
Well, I will tell you, that was Joe Burrow. I'm not ready to go that far with Josh Allen. I do think there were some issues defensively.
Yes, for sure.
But Joe Burrow stepped up.
Wow. I mean, big time. And again, we'll get into this in a little bit, but I just you like the hot hand, and right now, who's hotter between the Bengals and the Eagles? It's a good question.
Yeah, it is. They both look pretty hot to me. Let's get into last week. Let's talk about the records. Okay, so we discussed this before we came out here. We did an even split. The Chiefs, we both picked them to cover. They did not. It was a tighter game at the end thanks to that field goal.
Yeah, how about
that? Yeah, and that's why this is tough.
Hard. This is hard.
The Eagles did cover and win. We know that. I like the Bengals, and I guess I was pretty upset on pull up the 2-shot there because I want to tell a story.
All right, let's get it out.
I was sitting watching the Bengals-Bills game with my 8-year-old son, and he's into football now. He knows these players. He knows the terminology and all of it, and he's sitting there, and he always asks me this no matter what game we're watching. Hey, Dad, who are you rooting for? Okay, and I said, well, I'm rooting for the Bengals. I said I'm in a couple of pick'em leagues. I said I picked the Bengals. I said I picked the Bengals on my podcast.
Yep.
I'm feeling really good here, and so I'm cheering for the Bengals. You know? So sometimes he's a contrarian, so he takes the other team, but he must have liked the Bengals, so he's rooting for Joe Burrow. And we're so then that game ends, and then the Cowboys game starts.
Sure.
So I had some work to do around the house. So I go upstairs and I'm putting some laundry away, and I'm just on cloud 9. Right, got the upset, got it. So I open up my phone and I'm thinking, okay, I want to check in my one league, and I pull up my phone and, oh man, I picked the Bills, and then I thought, oh boy, I'm getting old. I hit the wrong button. I must have just hit the wrong button and picked the Bills.
Or did you kind of spread out your choices because you picked the Bengals on this show?
I did not mean to spread out my choices, though, so I thought, oh boy, Brett. So then I thought, that's okay. At least in the other league, I picked the Bengals.
It was a good pick.
No, I picked the Bills. I
picked
the Bills. I picked the Bills twice. I knew I picked the Bengals somewhere. It was right here.
It was right here. Well, you did it where maybe it counts most to the audience,
or least, depending. But it was just funny because sometimes that happens. I was rooting for the wrong team, but I was so impressed. You can go back now. Let's show them the rest of it. I was so impressed with the Bengals. We talked about that, but I am getting old. That's the problem. And I will say this: I picked the Cowboys because. Have you ever seen a more talented team flop? Maybe Alabama this year.
Well,
Truly, like just compared to everybody else, the Cowboys have talent.
they do, but this seems to be a recurring theme with them that, even going back a couple of years ago, they had a very talented wide receiver group and still couldn't get very far in the playoffs.
Well, and they've been through how many quarterbacks? Tony Romo was talented. He
I
got them to the
know,
playoffs.
I
Dak
know.
Prescott is talented.
And they spend money. I mean, it's not like
Correct.
They're
Well,
not,
they spend Jerry's money, but I really think he needs to, if he really wants to win one before he goes to the great AT&T Stadium in the sky, he probably needs to back off.
Well, ding ding, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's look at the teams that are doing well. The Bengals, the Eagles, and even for the most part the 49ers, although I didn't see a ton of it. It's the line play.
Yes.
It's the defensive line, the big uglies up front.
Starts up front.
And I just feel like Dallas is always missing that big pass rush. They're always missing
Now-
a piece or two. Now, Mike is great.
Tony got hurt.
he can't do it himself.
Their
Tony
running
Pollard,
back.
yep.
Yeah, and so that did have. I mean, that you can't ignore injuries.
No,
we know that.
And
but
he's probably their fastest player on offense outside of C.D. Lamb.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, the guy's a runner. I mean, really.
But I do think there's got to be some introspection happening. I just looked at some of the quotes from Jerry Jones. He's not worried about Mike McCarthy's future. He said there's nothing to think about there. At some point, you kind of have to reshuffle the deck because this core is getting older and their window's closing.
I do wonder. Well, maybe there's no wonderment now about Mike McCarthy. And one of the things that we talked about, and I want to get into this in a little bit, but I'll just throw it here. When you look at the NFL, I really do think that Jim Harbaugh is somebody that wants to be back in the NFL.
Sure.
Now, some of this is games, and these guys play games, and their agents play games. But there's a reason Jim Harbaugh isn't getting hired. If you look at there's always exceptions here.
Yep.
But a lot of the coaches that are getting hired and a lot of what's worked recently, young hotshots, right?
Yep.
Sean McVay, Zach Taylor.
Zach Taylor, yeah.
From the Bengals, right?
Nick Sirianni.
Nick Sirianni, great, right? And we could pick a slew of others. Now you've got your old stalwart in Andy Reid, but Bill Belichick seems to be on the downswing. We'll talk about him in a little bit too. But I'm just saying Jim Harbaugh doesn't really fit that mold.
No, and I think it's one of these things where these young coaches come in, they have a hot start. Cliff Kingsbury's another example. I mean,
he's in Thailand.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure where he is. But I think their new offenses come in, they wow the league for 2 or 3 years, and then it's a copycat league, and everybody starts picking up the pieces and figuring out what they're doing.
Right.
And let's face it, Jeffrey Lurie has shown us you can go out and find a good head coach that maybe is not conventional.
Yes.
And if he wins the locker room the way Nick Sirianni did, you can get a quick turnaround.
In the NFL, that's what it takes. You have to win the locker room because Doug Peterson did for a time, and then, of course, he had some front office problems. But he was unconventional. You bring in Nick. He's doing well, and he won the locker room. Chip Kelly was unconventional, didn't win the locker room, but he did get to the playoffs. And I think some people forget about that. But there was also, again, trying to be your own GM doesn't work.
Too much.
Too
And
much.
that's what Bill Belichick might be finding out. But I will say it's similar in the college game, too. It's so much about your coordinators. Coordinators are such an important hire for any coach. And, again, using Nick Sirianni as an example, he surrounded himself with what he thought were the smartest people he could afford.
Correct.
And look how it's paid off.
And we're going to get into coordinator talk in just a bit. So right now, let's go back to last week. What are our overall records here?
So
Because
let's play it forward here.
okay.
It was a split week between both of us, 2-2 records. When we look overall, you're 80 and 90.
I mean, these are losing records. I mean, this is not good.
Well, as soon as the NFL picked up, that's when we tanked.
But so that is how many games now? 170?
Yeah, which again,
That's a lot of games.
it's a lot of games, and a lot can go wrong.
Yeah.
And here we are. We're at the end of the year, and
picking against the spread. But I would say if we need to factor out just the weather games that we've picked,
Right.
we've probably done pretty well.
I think so, because again, that's the whole reason we're here is to understand how weather can change the lines. And one of these lines this week has intrigued me a lot.
We're going to get into that. And so we're going to pick the conference championship games. And then we're going to, I think for the Super Bowl week, we're going to introduce some of those prop bets. And maybe
fun
that'll give me a chance to try to catch up. Because right now, I'm getting that pie.
You are getting that pie. You better start thinking about what flavor you want.
Yeah, we're going to get, we need to get 2 pies. One that you can throw and then one that we can share.
That would be
afterward.
great.
Okay, so
That
we
would be
have to
great.
do that. I do want to. We're going to get into all the football stuff. We do have some quick Philadelphia Phillies
This is
news,
big.
and of course, by the way, as it snows out our window, pitchers and catchers reporting In less than a month?
Well, actually, I think it's 20 days. So now it's
Yeah.
down to 19. Yesterday was 20 days. It's 19. It's earlier this year because of the World Baseball Classic.
Right. And some of the
Guys are
players
reporting faster, so they
yeah.
get their work in. Then they go play for their respective countries and come back. So
And come back for the
it's
season.
a nice little wrinkle to the season. Everything's starting up a little bit faster.
Well, but this, of course, doesn't have anything to do with the current Phillies. But how about Scott Rowland being elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame? Your thoughts on Scott and growing up watching him?
I mean, to play third base on the concrete jungle that was Veterans Stadium.
That's right, by the way. He still played in the vet.
Oh, he did, and he was very good. And he always had his golden retriever with him. He didn't have quite the personality that fit Philadelphia, but he wasn't wrong at the time. People remember the exit more than they remember his play. He was a vacuum at third base. And short of Mike Schmidt, I think he is the best third baseman in Phillies history. And it's close with Mike. If Scott would have stayed with the franchise, he could have been right up there with some of the records. I mean, he hit home runs. His defense was outstanding.
Yeah, I hated to see him become a Cardinal.
It was awful. It was awful. Now, we got Polanco out of that deal.
I hate the Cardinals.
I do, too, because, again, they absorb all the good guys, it seems like, most years.
And they're always good.
They're always good. They're kind of America's team in baseball in many ways, other than the Yankees. But I will say this much. Between him and Rico Brogna growing up, it was always Scott Rowland over to Rico Brogna, Harry Callis on the call.
Yeah, Scott Rowland at the plate.
Rowland.
So it just so happy for him, and I think now the city and the Phillies fans do look back on his time very fondly.
And to that end, John Middleton, the majority owner of the Phillies, said at a later date and time they will celebrate Scott Rowland. So perhaps this is the nice homecoming that's needed.
Yeah.
But I will say this much. Scott was kind of ahead of his time in a way. He was blaming management at the time, Ed Wade, a very controversial general manager, for not pushing the chips in. They always had a couple of players back in the 90s, but they never formed a full team. And he wasn't wrong. He wanted the team to invest. He wanted to stay, but there was no commitment there.
And by the way, what does it seem like they're doing now?
Right, the opposite. And Jim Tomei kind of was the change with that all of a sudden they started spending money, getting the free agents. And I wish I could have seen Rowland and Tomei on the same team. I still wish that.
You're a big market team. Act like it.
You're a top 5 market.
Yeah. And we say that all the time.
I know. And it doesn't take much. Again, just to be competitive, get to 500 every year.
Yeah. And
it was always so difficult.
The expectations this year are going to be through the roof, but there is time for baseball later. Right now, we do want to move on to coaching news in college, and let's talk about two of the biggest vacancies right now in college. Nick Saban's all by himself. He looked around the locker room, and there was, of course, talk about this Bama. Nick Saban, believe it or not, has not won a title in the last 2 years.
So quite the streak there.
It's quite the streak for Bama, and a lot of the fans don't care if they ever see Bill O'Brien again. They really, though, blamed Pete Golding and the defensive effort.
I think that's the bigger flop.
And so what I love about that is Nick drove Pete Golding to Lane Kiffin's door and left him on the front porch, and that's it. And by the way, Lane Kiffin needed an upgrade at defensive coordinator, and this may be that. But Nick knows that it wasn't happening. And as for Bill O'Brien, if you think about this, you want to talk about you had mentioned about underachieving or something like that. Bryce Young, right? Bill O'Brien had him for 2 years, couldn't get it done.
It's shocking because of the success he had with a guy like Hackenberg.
One of the few coordinators that has not won a title at Alabama, Bill O'Brien. And
it's weird.
I just, but also it's weird. But if you think about it, again, he's a pro guy. He's running a pro-style offense. And I'm not sure it worked.
You got to have the talent to do it. You got to have the right pieces.
So Saban calls Belichick up and says, "Hey, bud, can you take him off my hands?" And I do think, by the way, that Bill O'Brien, will be a really great fit up in New England. Bill Belichick. Remember, who was running Bill Belichick's offense this year?
Matt Patricia.
Who is a defensive coordinator.
Right. So that made no sense. But, there's a lot of skeptical people here saying, well, maybe he's not the OC. Maybe he's the head coach in waiting, Bill O'Brien.
Well, listen, that could be. There's a case, too, of a lot of people are going to criticize him for his tenure at the Texans. But the last memory I have of him was he did make the playoffs several
He
years
did
in a
make the
row.
playoffs, and they had a fairly strong team. They just could never get quite over the hump.
Correct.
And since then, they've been just totally irrelevant.
And again, they're a poorly run franchise, but New England is much better, and they should be willing to spend the money. So that is a possibility. But I think just to get Bill Belichick back on track, you've got Mac Jones, right?
Yep.
Did he work with him in Alabama? Was he there under Mac?
There probably was an overlap.
I forget. Was
Which,
he?
again, that just makes more and more
that
sense.
makes more sense. So that is a good landing spot for him. So now the question becomes, who do you think is going to end up at Alabama? Let's start on the offensive side of the ball because they need a quarterback, by the way.
Bobby Petrino would have been interesting. Now, obviously, Jimbo took that off his hands.
Yes, vroom.
What about Cliff Kingsbury?
Again, he's in Thailand.
Nick could certainly bring him back with a lasso.
You think? I mean, I guess if Nick Saban is calling you in Thailand,
I think
you would answer.
I think you take the call.
If you get service, Cliff Kingsbury may not.
I think
he may be below ground over there.
I think it's very interesting because, unfortunately for Nick, the timing's a little weird. You know,
it's late.
He got it. This is all happening late in the coaching carousel, so you don't really know who's available, who's taking these calls at this point.
There was talk that perhaps Dan Mullen would go.
Well, that's interesting.
And but apparently Dan has put that to. He said he is happy with the TV side of things. He's on ABC and ESPN now. He doesn't really want to do it, and he's collecting I think $12 million from Florida. So he's not. Why would he want to go and be abused by Nick Saban?
Well, right. I mean, that's the bigger question.
Now,
I do worry though.
That could lead to another head coaching job.
Correct.
But he may not want to do it.
Correct. I do worry about guys like Mike Yurcich, who's on the up and up. Does he get a phone call? And then that could upset the apple cart for someone like Penn State. Now,
I think you have to be concerned.
I don't know what other names are out there at this point. There's not a lot of smoke around this yet, which I also find interesting.
No, Dan Mullen, I had heard there was some smoke there. Cliff Kingsbury was a name that has been brought up.
I think that's a smart one to think about.
But again, you're going to have to find him.
Correct.
He may want to take some time off, and I don't blame these guys. It's a tough job.
And you know who if he wasn't a head coach right now, Joe Moorhead would have been a great OC in Alabama. Talk about a creative guy that works with what he's got.
Well, but listen, would you rather be OC at Alabama or head coach at Akron? Well, I know what I would rather be.
I know, but he wants to be a head coach, it seems like.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. Now, on the defensive side of things, the name that everyone keeps buzzing about is Jeremy Pruitt. Now, Jeremy Pruitt, remember, was Saban's defensive coordinator.
Yes, before.
And there was very little drop-off between he and Kirby Smart. Kirby left to go to Georgia. Pruitt was the coordinator. Then he goes to Tennessee, and it was just, it was an abomination. Has the show cause from the NCAA. Now, the latest that I had heard yesterday when I was listening to our friends on the Feinbaum show was that they can get around the show cause. Now, he may not be allowed to do recruiting.
Interesting. So that could be a big factor.
It could be a big factor.
Now, they have the #1 class, so maybe there's not a lot of work to do there.
And that's what Paul Feinbaum said, that they can probably get around that at a school like Alabama, meaning that they kind of recruit themselves.
Sure.
But that may be the perfect type of guy that Nick Saban wants. Somebody he trusts already and somebody he knows that can lock down that defense. They need it. Well, LSU's breathing down their neck with Brian Kelly. They got to get this right.
Because, there's teams on the up and up, and Lane Kiffin's still out there, too. I know a lot of people make fun of Lane, but,
and now Bobby Petrino.
Right. And there's a lot of interesting factors in the SEC, and that's why I kind of think an SEC guy would make sense. How about on the offensive side? I just thought about this, Mr. Tom Herman.
Is he still out there? I'm sure he is.
Yeah.
He's in the well with all the other
he's
failed football
good
coaches, but he is a good
and a good recruiter.
Good recruiter. He has worked with quarterbacks and the offensive side of things. Keep an eye on that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I want to talk about Michigan briefly.
I don't know what's going on there.
Well, they have all the success. They beat Ohio State and they get to the playoffs. And then you have all of this trouble with Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL. He said he wasn't going to look around. Yep. Then he looks around. He's flirting with teams. They're interviewing him, okay? Then he puts that to rest. Then they get the NCAA sniffing around. And, don't get me wrong. I think we all know that the NCAA is feckless. But they,
It's still noise you don't want.
It's still noise you don't want, but at the end of the day, it's still not that big of a thing. Now they just had to fire their
co-OC.
Their co-OC because he was tampering with computers or something on
campus.
Which
is bizarre. That's really weird.
Yeah, so just a weird situation. Again, what do we always say about Harbaugh? He's weird. This is all weird.
And at some point, I kind of thought with the NFL rumors last year, it would affect recruiting. At some point, if you're a parent of a kid that's big time talent, do you start going, maybe is that the best place to go?
Well, and to be honest, it's not like Michigan is signing Bama, Georgia, Ohio State classes
Correct.
either. So I think that's probably part of the reason why. So keep an eye on that. And then why don't you talk a little bit about Penn State finally has its guy to lead its wide receivers, and it did not take long.
It did not take long. It's a name I was not familiar with coming into this search, and his name
too.
is Marquez Hagans. And by all reports, out of UVA, where he was a coach for, I believe, almost a decade.
And it's his alma mater.
Yes, he was beloved.
Yep.
Most recently, the coaching staff said out of anyone that we could lose potentially, he would be the biggest loss on this coaching staff. I don't know if Anthony Poindexter, who also came from UVA, was a help here. Kind of
Probably.
referring to Franklin. This is a good guy. But I think what's very interesting. This is the DMV is a huge recruiting area for Penn State, and this is what that hire screams to me, that they wanted to go after someone in the DMV. And let's face it, I mean, Trace McSorley was kind of an unknown recruit that came out of that area. There's talent down there.
It's absolutely, and I'll make a second point on top of that, which I think that is the main point. But when you look around, wide receivers haven't been they haven't been our strong suit.
He inherited
he inherited
Taylor
Dotson.
Stubblefield, inherited Dotson,
Right.
inherited Parker Washington.
But and again, Parker Washington didn't put up great numbers.
He
They
had
were
a
good.
good second half.
They were good, but they weren't great. And I think Franklin's looking around, going, okay, who am I after? I'm going.
What do we
after
have to do to beat elite?
Correct. I need to go after Ohio State.
Yep.
Look at Brian Hartline, who's now their OC, by the way. But look at the
That name just keeps popping up.
well, right, and again, it's like a thorn in our side. But
Right.
look at what he was able to do by getting top receivers like Pennsylvania's number one
Yes.
receiver, Julian Fleming.
I know.
Who's now going to be a contributor. You cannot let that happen.
No, you cannot let that happen. I want to bring in Mr. Shiner. Do you have a point about that?
Well, the big thing that I saw is Chris Long had tweeted something out and saying how great of a coach this guy was. So
He's from there, right?
yeah. Chris Long went to UVA.
Howie's son.
And when you have a defensive player saying how awesome an offensive coach is, I think speaks a lot to who this guy is and why Franklin wanted to bring him in.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to the whole culture aspect. I mean,
Yeah.
Franklin said in his statement about this, about adding to the Penn State culture, he's a fit.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal these days.
We know that what I like about Franklin, and he's criticized for many things, and some of them rightfully so, but for the most part, what I keep saying is this guy wants to win, and he's gonna make a change. He's not going to be stubborn about it. We haven't really seen it. Now, some people could argue, well, maybe he was stubborn with Clifford. We've kind of debunked that here. I just don't see that either. But when it comes to these coaches, if he thinks he can get a better recruiter, if he thinks he can get a better schemer, he's going to get him in here, especially now that, there is momentum going into next season. So
There is. And
Yeah, for
again,
sure.
there's going to be a lot of expectations on some of these younger players, including some of those younger wide receivers in a talented group. They got to develop. I mean, it's one thing to recruit. Then you got to take it to the next level and develop these guys.
And that is so true. And I think, too, that was a little bit lacking in the wide receiver room. Okay, I want to get back to the NFL now, the
Yep.
coaching carousel. We mentioned Bill O'Brien, but
I have some other ones here for you
yeah,
if you're interested.
does somebody say the name Jim Bob Cooter?
He's floating out there again.
He's floating out there again, and now he's headed to Tampa Bay.
Yeah, as offensive coordinator replacing Brian Leftwich, that should be interesting.
But,
Brian,
it could be what they need.
it could be, but who's their quarterback? I guess that's the question.
That's a big question.
Another name that's been floated out there that's been very common, Brian Flores, who is a current senior defensive assistant linebacker coach, interviewing for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job. I think that would be interesting.
Was he in Miami, or am I making that up?
He was. He was the head coach of Miami, and then there was some gruffling afterwards.
I do remember that.
Eric,
That's putting it nicely.
Yeah, put it nicely. Eric Studsville is interviewing for the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator job. Jeff Saturday is re-interviewing for the head coaching job with the Colts.
Got to give him a
Is
shot, I
Jim-
guess.
Yeah.
Can I ask it? Is Jim Irsay okay? Or can I throw
Did
this
he
out
get
there
caught
too?
on a plane with another bag of
Whatever.
stuff?
But again, can I just say, that's weird. He's weird, right? That's
There's
a weird
something
situation
weird going
too.
on there.
The Colts in Michigan. Weird.
The Texans, another
water.
weird franchise. They are interviewing. They are interviewing the Giants OC, Mike Kafka, who at one point was an Eagles' backup quarterback. Mike Kafka burst onto the scene this year. The
Good
offense,
name.
yeah, certainly ticked up with the Giants. This is another interesting Giants note. Davis Webb, who played quarterback
Yes.
against the Eagles for that last game of the season, he
Yes.
wants to apparently coach. He got his taste of the NFL, and now he wants to coach.
And I just heard on, I want to say it was Stuart Mandel and Bruce Feldman's podcast. Shout out to those guys. Love listening to the Audible there. They mentioned Davis Webb, and they think, I think it was Feldman that said, I think he's going to be, he will make a very good coach.
Yeah, it could be something very
So,
interesting to follow.
That I kind of like. So that's kind of the news and notes that we're keeping track
I
of
have one more
here.
for you.
Oh, there's still more.
I got one more for you. So,
is it the Broncos DC?
Yes, Vic Fangio. I have
Vic
trouble
Fangio,
saying. Yeah,
yes,
I have trouble saying his name.
He's been around too.
He is up for the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator job. So a lot of changes, it seems like, in that AFC East.
Well, but Denver, getting back to them, they are owned by the Waltons now, I believe. Correct?
Yes, I think you're correct.
They listen. They need to spend money now. They still have the Russell Wilson problem.
Yes,
but you say coaching doesn't matter, and I still think it does. I don't know if anybody thought that Patrick Mahomes was going to end up being as good as he is. Who's he play for? Andy Reid.
Andy Reid.
Just some of these guys.
Andy
can
Reid's
develop,
a magician.
They can develop the quarterbacks. You know what I mean? And I don't think there would be many people that would say that Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy would be facing each other in an NFC title game.
Nope, and here we are.
And here we are. So that's the interesting part. Okay,
You had another Vic Fangio note.
I guess Sirianni was said that if Gannon would be entertained with head coaching offers, that's where he would go first.
And there's been a lot of smoke about Gannon 2 years in a row now getting a head coaching job offer from the Texans. So it's something to watch. And
well, they need one.
Everybody's reaching out to our assistants right now, obviously, because
they're
they're pretty hot.
Well,
but is that also what you talk about when your team's not in the playoffs anymore?
Correct.
We are still in the playoffs.
Which is a wonderful thing.
But listen, when you're good, you're going to get your assistants.
You're going to be pilfered.
Yep. No,
Again,
it's part of the game for sure.
It's part of the game, and it's unfortunate, but they deserve their shots too. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, get your thoughts here quickly on one more topic before we get into the games of the week, which are, of course, the conference title games. Just watching these networks and their playoff coverage. Now, I don't want to talk about the announcers just yet, but two separate questions. Just the look, the feel when these big games come on. What network do you think does it the best?
Let's go to the production guy here on the table about this.
Well, I could get technical about how some are in 720p, some are in 1080i. That's a CBS versus Fox thing, but that's more of on the local level of things.
So you mean a 1080 TV might not actually pick up a 1080 broadcast?
We did
a lot of
know
people
that.
get confused by
we
that.
can get into some inside football on that, but
I just when you're sitting there in your armchair watching this, what looks good? How they present it, and who makes it seem like a big game?
I'm partial to Fox during the game. I think they have a good rotation of their commentators and stuff. That's also a little biased because I'm used to watching the Eagles so much on Fox. Although that's been changing a lot now that they can bid for the games.
Right.
But I mean, I think what everybody's talking about right now is just how awesome Tony Romo has been on the air. I know he's been doing that for a while, but
there actually is some debate about that.
Really? Yeah, there's detractors.
Interesting.
People
Because
have
I always thought
soured
that
on
was
him.
okay. Well, I'm a guy that needs to hear about this.
Well,
then.
and it's actually funny that you brought that up. So we didn't talk about this.
No, we
before,
didn't. No.
But this is exactly part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up. Now, this is to just not. I'm trying to leave Twitter out of this. Twitter will turn on you.
There's always negativity
but I do
there.
think there are some issues there. So when I'm watching the broadcast, Nance and Romo feel a little off to me this year. And the other thing that I noticed, and he's been criticized for this in some media circles too, is when he first started, right? He was able to talk about a magician. Call these plays, and that's what really made him famous and how exciting he was. Well, he's been out of the league now for several years, and that's been happening less. So that's number one.
He does seem lost at times too.
Yeah, he seems a little lost. And then the other thing is there is a cadence to these things. When you work together with somebody for a long time, you can pick up on each other's cadence, like Buck and Aikman, right? They go from Fox to ESPN. and you don't even know. I mean, the mic flags are different, but it's a Buck and Aikman broadcast. And I know you've criticized them, but you get my point here.
They know their cadence. They know the pace.
They don't have to be your favorite announcers, but when they're calling a game, you just know it. And Nance and Romo this year, I don't know. There's an unwritten rule that you don't step on your play-by-play guy, and Romo does that a lot with Jim Nance. And I don't know if Nance likes it.
So that's really interesting because I just heard an interview with Nance on the Ryan Russillo podcast.
Yes.
And he was talking about Romo specifically, about how this year, a lot of the times his foreseeing of what the play is was off. He equated it to the fact that Tony Romo is such a veteran quarterback that he got it right. The quarterback is the one who messed up the play.
That could be true.
So that's why he's so good with quarterbacks like Tom Brady. Now, is that going back to because Tom Brady's so old, that's what Romo's used to knowing? Or is it the mental capacity? Does he know? And the quarterbacks are the ones screwing up the play with the wrong audible. Point. Now, that was Nance talking about his partner, which obviously he's not going to slam his partner on a broadcast. But that kind of goes in line with exactly what you were kind of saying. Yeah. And he's saying the other backing his guy.
Well, yeah, that is an interesting tidbit. And the other thing that, he got criticized about is the game after DeMar Hamlin came, but DeMar, we knew he was going to be okay, and then they played the next week. They ran off the opening kickoff.
Right.
And Nance called it pretty well, and then Romo kind of jumped in, and there was some criticism as to whether or not he should have just let it breathe and let the pictures kind of tell the. And
Storybook, I think, was the call, right?
Yeah, and Romo started screaming, Jim, hey, oh. And some people thought the moment should have just been pictures and you can agree or not. I mean, Tony Romo is infectious with his energy. You got to give him that. I don't think they're my favorite booth, though. I still do, just because they've been together a while. I do like Buck and Aikman. I think ESPN has really elevated their whole NFL broadcast just because of the team.
I'm used to that being Fox, too.
You're right. We're used to them on Eagles games.
Sometimes you forget that's
correct.
With the mouse.
NBC is still probably the standard with Collinsworth and Tirico now.
They're my favorite. I was going to say.
They look sleek. They just do a great job.
The graphics are great.
Tirico fit right in. I mean, I miss Al, but Tirico's a pro, and he did Monday Night Football for a while. And Fox is good now. I think I like Kevin Burkhardt and Greg Olson. The only issue that I have is they need to just become that team, right? This is only their first year doing it. They get the Super Bowl, by the way.
And that's very interesting. And by the way, did you see Rihanna's going to be the Super Bowl act?
I did.
And did you see all the Whopper commercials in between?
So my kids go around the house singing that now.
Whopper,
hey,
Whopper.
Whopper, Whopper. Yeah.
Breaking news, Chris Stapleton is doing the national anthem.
Oh, really?
Oh,
yeah,
that is good.
That's
a good
released
tidbit.
Yesterday, I believe.
All right, well, it is now time to talk about these games.
Games of the week.
Before we talk about the matchups here, I just want to briefly mention, so this storm that's moving through now, it is not going to be a factor by the time we get to Sunday. However, there is yet another front and another system to watch across the central part of the country, which, depending on timing, may impact either the Chiefs or the Eagles. It's an in-betweener. We're towing the line here and talking on a Wednesday. It's hard.
These are both Sunday games. Now, the interesting thing is the Eagles might see some showers Sunday night, but they play first.
Right.
The Chiefs
and that actually may help them.
Yeah, the Chiefs may see some snow later on. Now, by the way, that 49ers-Eagles game is at 3 p.m.
Yes, I think I did mess that up. My apologies about that.
Just to be aware, and then, of course, the second game is at 6:30. But, Dan, talk about where the lines are and which one surprised you.
Well, the Eagles being the home team and what happened last week surprises me with the 2.5-point line. It seems low.
Insulting.
Bingo. I do think it's insulting to the Eagles and what they put up last week. I think they're humming. I think I texted you this. I think they were playing possum for the last month.
That was a good line. I agree. They needed to just come out,
lay low, stay healthy,
be ready for the playoffs. Yeah, people love Kyle Shanahan and people love that defense. But they squeaked a win out against the Cowboys. It wasn't great. But I would agree. I mean, I'm shocked it's not around 6. Touchdown may be high.
I think it's going to be ruckus in Philly. I think it's going to be unlike anything the 49ers have seen this year.
They have to travel.
And here's another little tidbit. The Eagles got an extra day off.
Right, because they played on Saturday.
So I think that's a nice little advantage.
Cue the $3 up for just a second. because that reminds me of another story that I wanted to talk about.
It's story time with Brett.
The NFL put out a press release bragging about how many tickets they sold to Atlanta. If the Chiefs and the Bills were to play there for the
I know where you're going with this.
Yes, for the neutral site conference championship game. And Pro Football Talk reported that this is now seriously being considered by the league and by the owners to have neutral site championship games. Now, let me just tell you the reasons why, and then we will chat about that. They already own, so they don't own, the league is directly involved in the conference championship games. They own those games, so they can do whatever they want with them. Okay, now, the reasons that they would think about doing the neutral site games, a couple of which I didn't think of. Remember what all the bowl games do now? The Rose Bowl game presented by Prudential.
Major sponsorships.
They can have major sponsors with naming rights attach themselves to these championship games. And if you're thinking, boy, how are they going to sell tickets to these games? Well, there's no problem there, too. They have all their corporate donors that they want up in the suites, and they can make a ton of money by doing it that way. Because for some season ticket holders, they don't have to pay for these extra tickets in some cases. So this would be a money grab. Now, we're nowhere close to getting voted on, but it has been discussed by the league and by the owners at times. This was all according to Pro Football Talk. And again, Twitter blew up over this. Now, I will tell you right now, it doesn't really matter what the fans want, but everybody, including myself, hates it. And we hate it for the very reason we just mentioned it. The Eagles are going to have such an advantage on Sunday. Whether or not they win, I'm just saying, they're going to have an advantage. They have to play a team that has to fly across the country. It's going to be a raucous environment, and they earned that, by God. They earned that.
Well, and what happens, let's say it's Atlanta, if the Falcons ever figure out their franchise, and it ends up being almost a home game for whatever team gets in it.
Now keep in mind, Tampa did play the Super Bowl at Raymond James. That happens. I'm more concerned with the fact that how do you reward these teams if you're the number one seed and they don't even get to play the conference title game at home? I think it's Bush League.
I hope it's a non-starter for the players. Now, again, it all comes down to money. Do they get a kickback from it? Then we could be talking about something different. But I don't like it.
I don't either. I think it's because again, what is better than starting your Sunday by watching the link go nuts for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then, and I'm an Eagles fan, but you know what my favorite stadium is? Arrowhead.
Oh, good point. I wouldn't have thought about that.
I just love Arrowhead. It is so loud.
It's iconic.
It's iconic.
Yeah.
And that place is going to – so you go from the link on Sunday to Arrowhead. Who wants to watch a soulless championship game? We see it all the time at these neutral site games in college. It's terrible.
Well, imagine if there's never an NFC championship game ever again in Lambeau Field. That seems criminal.
Mm-hmm. And there probably wouldn't be.
Right.
Well, and this even plays into, I think, how it affects the end of the regular season.
Yes.
You work in those last games to gain your home field advantage.
Correct.
If that's now a
you.
neutral site. That's just asking them to rest people even more now.
I just hope it's a non-starter.
Why add the extra game at this point?
You had a reaction when I started. You were like,
no, it's horrible. I don't like the fact
idea.
that the second seed doesn't get a bye still.
Right.
And now that's because they wanted to add another game. And what is that? Money.
But it worked out okay, but I agree. I think the second seed should also get a bye yet.
And let's face it, if expansion's real,
where
are we heading toward?
Yeah. Germany,
Mexico,
anywhere.
Fill
them up.
Canada at some point, perhaps.
So I just wanted to bring that up and point out that was news that broke since we met last, and I'm glad you guys agree with me, and I think most fans do.
Fan of it.
And I think it also prices a lot of people out of going to those games now because travel's involved. The whole reason that you sell so many tickets at home,
people can walk down the street.
Eagles fans this past week went to a lacrosse game to get tailgating early in Philly.
That's awesome.
What does that tell you about home field advantage?
It's no offense to the lacrosse players, but yes.
And it was a blowout to the Philadelphia team, I think, they're called the Wings.
Didn't you?
Back in the day.
Okay, that was a little while ago.
But the Philadelphia, they're the Wings, right? Is that what they're called?
The indoor team is the Wings.
Yeah, they got blown out.
I'm impressed that you know that. But listen, all is well in Philly right now. We'll see what happens on Sunday.
So let's talk about the weather.
First let's talk about the other game. We got to mention the Bengals
Let's
Chiefs.
go back.
So let's go back there. now, by the way, what do you make about that game? Because now the Bengals are favored.
This was the line I teased that I
punch us up there
yep.
so we could see it.
This
there.
is the line I teased that I said.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. The Chiefs were the favorite by 1.5, and now it's flipped the other way. The Bengals are a 1.5 favorite, and the skepticism is right now, at least we're going back to Twitter and some of the negativity out there, that does Vegas know something no one else does about the status of Patrick Mahomes?
Well, I don't know if they know the status, but we all saw the play, and
it was ugly.
I do think. Now we also saw him come back. I also think that people may be thinking. It's kind of foolish to bet against the Bengals right now.
I think it is, but I do think Andy Reid, I do think the Chiefs have a lot of talent, and I think it's a lot to write them off because even when Chad Henne came in the game, he led them down the field.
And again, where is the game?
Arrowhead Stadium, which is now, I think they renamed it because of sponsorship.
The sponsorship, they named the field Geha Field or GEHA Field at Arrowhead, but it's Arrowhead. So the point is, bring me Arrowhead. That's going to be a heck of a thing. So let's talk about the weather. We're going to be on the fringe here for both cities.
Yep, and it's an in-betweener. As I mentioned, clouds start to roll into Philly. For tailgaters, though, it's mild. I mean, temperatures near 50 degrees.
Yeah, it is going to be a warm weekend.
This is the end of January.
We're watching the snow out our window now. It's all going to be gone by probably tonight.
Yep, and so then for Sunday during the day, there's the shower chances over western PA. If this trends a little bit faster, it's something we do need to watch for game time, but I'm hoping the earlier start around 3 o'clock, it's totally fine.
It's totally fine, and it should be. Do we have any wind to worry about, though?
There is a little bit of wind ahead of this front. Jake Elliott has been very, very good in the playoffs. I think nearly perfect.
Yes, unlike the Cowboys kicker.
Unlike the Cowboys kicker who got the yips. Winds about 5 to 15 miles per hour during the game. But, again, for January standards, outdoors, it doesn't get much better than this.
Not in Philadelphia. Now, let's go to Kansas City. Another, by the way, place that can see some ugly weather. Look at it. It's going to be cold there.
Yeah, this is the colder side of that storm.
And they're the night game.
They're the night game. So keep in mind, cold during the day, and we're going to play this out for you. There is snow in the vicinity. Now, it should be east of Kansas City by that point, but there's even a little bit more coming in over the Rockies to the west. So there is a chance weather could be more involved in this game. It wasn't a huge factor. In this past weekend's game, we thought there would be a little more snow, but it stayed mainly rain.
I think it looks – we're hoping it's right, but it could be breezy.
It could be breezy, and I know they were concerned about the confidence of Buckner, the kicker for the Chiefs during the game this past weekend.
Yeah, and that line's within a field goal.
And the line's within a field goal, so winds a little bit stronger than Philly at times, it appears, during the game. So, again, something to watch. Let's go to our picks because I think this is very interesting.
Yep.
I've had this vision in my head going all the way back to the beginning of the season. I've seen the matchup. I've seen Nick Sirianni across the field from Andy Reid, and I can't get away from it. Now you know my picks.
Well, no, I'm with you on that. I think that the Eagles are going to win. I think that home field is going to take over, and I like them to get the cover here. They can. I mean, all we need is for them to win by a field goal.
And I think this is one of the rare times, at least in my recent memory, where the top two teams in both conferences are playing in the championship.
Yeah. And
it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And again, you whittle out. People are worried about blowouts in the new college football playoff. Guess what? We saw that in the NFL playoffs with the Giants and the Eagles. So
it happens.
It does happen. But I think these are going to be very, very good games. And listen, I'm with you. I'm going to go Eagles and Chiefs, and I think it's going to be one heck of a Super Bowl when that happens.
And I do think, going back to some of the over-under numbers on these games, I think there's going to be more points in this one for the Eagles and 49ers than what the Cowboys and Niners mustered up. I do think, though, that may have been the best I've seen the Eagles defense play in about 2 months against the Giants.
Yeah.
I mean, they were elite. They were getting after the quarterback.
Oh, my goodness. They rushed the quarterback and affected Daniel Jones probably better than I've seen all year from them. And now we're talking about Brock Purdy.
And going back to some of the injury concerns leading into divisional game weekend, Josh Sweat played.
Yeah.
Performed up to standard, if not at an elite level.
Oh, yeah, he looked elite.
Lane Johnson played every snap he needed to.
And credit to you two guys for pointing that out.
I mean, he was incredible. For someone who has a tear in a very sensitive area, for someone who needs to plant his legs.
Yes. Look good.
But these guys, if for anyone who's never seen an NFL guy up close, they are monsters of human beings. And he is just a brick wall at right tackle.
Kind of like the weather team.
That's right. I mean, we're large and in charge.
You got it. Let's go to our final picks right now. Mr. Shiner, to step outside and say, final picks.
Yeah, our final picks. Here we go.
It is going to be the Eagles and the Chiefs. And listen, again, Dan, all we need is a field goal here. We both like the Chiefs. You're going to pick them to cover. I'm just going to pick them outright. But listen, I need to make up some ground. This week isn't going to cut it for me. So we're going to pick some prop bets in a couple of weeks, and we hope to have some special guests in the coming weeks too to talk about a lot of different things.
Well, it's been a fun season, and I don't. I keep going back to this, but I don't think we could have planned this any better. The two of us. The year we start a podcast, the Philadelphia Phillies are in the World Series.
And the Eagles have a shot to go to the Super Bowl.
The Eagles have a shot at the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Penn State makes the Rose Bowl.
Yes.
Where were we 20 years ago? We should have started this up way sooner.
Well, it's been fun. We've had some great reactions from you as well. And, of course, we have had some weather. We've had a hurricane. We've had a couple of snow events to talk about with these games. And
temperature swings, wind.
Wind, yeah. And it has certainly been fun as the season winds down. So, of course, coming up, we will have that pie-in-the-face payoff bet after the Super Bowl. As I mentioned, we're going to have some special interviews coming up in the podcast. We hope stay tuned for those, some surprise guests stopping by. And we had Ali Barubi last week talking about her trip to the Rose Bowl. It has been fun, and we're not going anywhere just because the season's over.
Well, and let me ask you this question. If for some reason the Eagles stumble against the 49ers, are you going to be disappointed or upset?
No, I don't think so, because
I think it's the best versus the best.
I think it's the best versus the best. And again, is Jalen Hurts going anywhere?
No. And
is
that's
Nick
the thing.
Sirianni going anywhere?
No.
Okay, so
A.J. Brown going nowhere. The only person that might not be back that's been key this season is Miles Sanders.
Right.
But we know in the NFL, running backs tend to come and go.
And that's what I said about the Phillies, too. I never expected them to make the World Series. A lot of those guys are coming back.
They've added to the team.
It feels good. Rob Thompson, just a great manager. You look at the Eagles, we are set up. Look at Penn State. We're set up well.
We're set up. Now, I will mention, too, something about the podcast pushing ahead. I will do my best to bring in some 76ers talk. I know it's not an outdoor sport, but they, too, are a team that has a good core. They just can't quite get there. So perhaps our podcast luck could rub off on them a little bit.
There you go. You could talk to Mr. Shiner about that.
Yes.
But I'm sure he would love that. It has been fun this week, everybody. Enjoy the conference title games. Enjoy the snow if you're getting it across the Northeast today. And Dan, we'll be right back here next week.
We certainly will be, my friend. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Go Birds.